Hi, and welcome to Marketing Communications. This is Chapter 5, and my name's David Gray from Charles Sturt University. In this chapter, we will look at the communications process. The learning objectives are basically to have a look at the elements of communication, to look at the receiver and the sender of the message, look at the various response models to the communication process, and also look at the way consumers process information in respect to marketing communications. This chart is an overall map of where the chapter goes. And if you'll see on the left-hand side, we look at the communication process, then the response hierarchies, looking at some of the traditional models and some of the alternative models. Firstly, if we have a look at the nature of communications, and we can see that there are many ways of looking at communication from a definitional point of view. First of all, it could be just in relation to the passing of information or to the exchange of ideas. But basically, it's about establishing a commonness or a oneness of thought between the sender and the receiver. We know it's a complex process, and it depends on many factors, including the nature of the message, the way that the audience interprets that message, and the context and the environment in which that message is received. A basic model of communication explored in the text covers the source and the sender, the encoding, the channel through which the message is dispersed, the decoding of that message by the receiver, and also the response modes. So if we have first of all, if we have a look at encoding, it's basically the source selects the words, the signs, or the symbols that are familiar to the target audience. Basically, we see an example here of Daniel Craig, who is a brand ambassador for Omega watches. And you can see that the success of a brand ambassador depends on the kind of knowledge that that ambassador has and the extent to which that ambassador is trusted. If we have a look at the overall message, we know that the message contains information or meaning that a source wants to convey to a receiver. Messages need to be put into a transmittable form that can go through to the particular channel. Now, the messages communicate meaning, the literal meaning, which is the conscious side, and the symbolic meaning, which is translated through the subconscious. Marketeers use people trained in semiotics and cultural anthropology to understand both these conscious and unconscious meanings. Now, semiotics is an important component of message building, and we see that the meaning of it is the study and the nature of meaning. If we have a look at the overall semiotic perspective, we see three components to every message. There's the object, the interpretant, and the sign or the symbol. As far as the interpretant goes, a good example is the J'adore commercial, in which Charlize Theron is used to encode this message of high fashion, elegance, and sensuality. And if we have a look at the one of the YouTube commercials, we can see how the nature of that message is conveyed.
I touch the rain. I look at the sun, and it says run.
Where the light shivers offshore through the tides of oceans, we are shining in the rising sun.
I watch it all turn, the water, the earth, the sun and me. J'adore. We are gold. J'adore. Dior.
So we can see that this particular commercial has been viewed by nearly 23 million people. Very, very successful campaign. If we have a look at the sign or the symbol, basically what we mean is that which represents the intended meaning, which could be words, pictures, sounds, and or colours. And now we can see, for example, the Quilton toilet paper example. And so you can see some of the themes developed are symbols of love, caring, and softness on this campaign. So we have the interpretant, the sign or symbol, and the object, which is the brand or the product. In relation to the symbol, you can see that Quilton uses a cherub, which is a cupid, a bow, and a fluffy clouds to convey caring and softness. And all of these signs or symbols can be very, very important to the overall message conveyed by the advertising or commercial or marketing communications process. If we have a look at the channels, we can see that the channel is the method by which the communication travels from the source to the sender. There are both personal and non-personal channels. So the personal channels are personal selling and word of mouth, and the non-personal channels are typically the print media, the broadcast media such as television and radio and the like. If we have a look at the receiver and the decoding process. So the receiver is the person with whom the sender shares their thoughts or information. The decoding is the process of transforming the sender's message back into thought. So we can see that this decoding process is influenced by the receiver's frame of reference, their experience, their values. Now, advertisers spend a lot of money investigating audiences' frames of reference, and much of this money is spent on both qualitative and quantitative research, and that's why there's a great deal of pre-testing of advertisements into how these kinds of messages will be received by their target audience. In this whole communication process, there's this question of noise. When we talk about noise, we talk about extraneous factors that create unplanned distortion or interference in the communications process. And some of the major sources of noise we call white noise. That's the signal transmission itself. There are situational factors, which are distractions. There's the clutter of different kinds of competitive messages. And there's also a lack of common ground, such as improper encoding, using a sign or symbol or words that are unfamiliar or different meaning to the sender's receiver. In the communications process, after the message has been received, there's the response or feedback mode. And when we talk about response, we're talking about the set of reactions the receiver has after seeing, hearing, or reading a message. Now, the feedback is part of the message recipient's response that is communicated back to the sender. And now feedback closes the loop and allows marketeers to monitor their message effectiveness, whether it's through personal selling or whether it's through social media feedback. When we analyze the receiver, this is a critical component of marketing communications, and that is to know exactly who it is that we're talking to. So the marketing communications process begins when the marketeer identifies the audience. How the marketeer finds out about the audience, these are the typical steps. Usually there's the process of market segmentation, which identifies the variables, needs and behaviours that divides the market into various homogeneous groups. And then the marketeers will develop a profile of each of the segments. Step 3 will be, and steps 3 and 4 relate to market targeting, and that is analysing how attractive each of these segments. In other words, is the market big enough to make money from this particular segment? And then step 4 is actually selecting a target segment to enter. Steps 5 and 6 relate to market positioning. In other words, what kind of positioning concept? What is the message? What is the theme? What is the pitch that the marketeer will make towards this particular market? And then step 6 is developing their communications process after having developed the positioning concept. Look at this customer-initiated marketing communication model. We see the source, which is the customer or other stakeholder. We may be developing a communication program, not just for the customer, but for a whole range of stakeholders, including employees. Then we have the message, which could be a question, a complaint, or a compliment. We have the channel through which that's distributed, and the receiver. Could be a person or a company. You can see at the top of the chart, we see noise. So there could be a busy signal, company delays, or incomplete information. And then we have the feedback, which relates to the 5 R's: responsiveness, recourse, recognition, respect, and reinforcement. How do we actually identify and map brand touch points for any kind of communication program? So when we talk about a brand touch point, we refer to those occasions when a customer or a potential customer comes into contact with a brand. So these touch points recognize the consumers can assume responsibility for initiating the flow of communications. One of the early seminal works in this area was that by Jan Carlson, who wrote a book called Moments of Truth and developed this through his experience with Scandinavian Airways. So the first thing is, what is actually a moment of truth? So we see in the left-hand bottom of the slide here, moment of truth is any time the customer comes into contact with any aspect of a company, however remote he or she has an opportunity to form an impression. So if we have a look at a moment of truth, a moment of misery, which is moments of truth which can actually turn out to be very bad for a company. We see tell a customer no without first telling them what you can do, quote the policy, fail to follow up or follow through, make the customer tell and retell their story with unnecessary transfers. And you'll notice that if you ever deal with a major telecommunications company, a major insurance company, a major utility company, with these big bureaucracies, you're likely to get shunted off into a whole bunch of people before you get your questions answered. Also, responding to complaints with an accusatory or interrogatory style. Also, refuse to take responsibility for problems, fail to apologise to customers, tell a customer they're wrong, even when they are wrong, or cut a customer off. These are all moments of misery that can spell can provide deep problems for brands that are dealing with individual customer concerns. We have a look at the models of the response process. So the traditional sales approach, or AIDA model, so goes through these 3 major stages. First of all, there's the cognitive stage, what I know or perceive; the affective stage, what people feel; and the behavioural stage. Now, behaviour can be trial, purchase, adoption, or rejection. Many marketing campaigns are designed to encourage consumers to trial a product or service. And AIDA refers to, first of all, gaining attention to a particular product or service, which is getting customers to think about the product initially, then to develop interest and desire through the affective stage, and then to take action during the behavioural stage. However, there are different models. There's in addition to the AIDA model, there's the hierarchy of effects model, which builds awareness and knowledge initially through the cognitive stage. The affective stage is split into liking, preference, and conviction, and then the final stage, behavioural stage, is purchase. There's the innovation adoption model, which is awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. And then there's the information processing, which is the presentation, attention, comprehension, yielding, retention, and behavioural stage during purchase. So there are just different ways of thinking about the same kind of process that goes through the marketing communication process. If we talk about the different methods of obtaining feedback, so the idea is that at each stage of a marketing campaign, that you really need to set up tests which will allow you to measure the effectiveness of each stage of the communication process. So, for example, if we have a look at this chart here, we see on the right-hand side steps in the persuasion process, exposure, presentation. And so the effectiveness test would be actually the circulation. So how many people did you actually reach at a particular time? Then when we look at the attention phase, we see listener, reader, viewer recognition. Comprehension, we're talking about recall and checklists. With message acceptance and yielding, we're talking about brand attitudes and purchase intent. With retention, we're talking about recall over time, and with purchase behavior, we're talking about inventory, point of purchase, consumer panel, scanner data, etc., and actual sales data. So I think the point here is that if you're going to run a marketing communications program, you want to be able to measure its effectiveness at each stage of the campaign. Some of the traditional learning hierarchy models, they're useful for marketing communication planners because basically what they see consumers as moving through a series of stages. The traditional model is, first of all, I think, then I feel, and then I act. So it's cognitive, affective, and behavioural in terms of that order. Now, sometimes buyers can be at different stages of the hierarchy, and it may be that in a particular commercial or retail setting, you think that buyers are at one stage when actually they're at another. So each stage of this process requires has different communication challenges. And so it's very important to develop a profile into making sure that you clearly understand each segment's level of awareness, liking, brand attitudes, etc. There are different kinds of alternative response models. So here in this chart, we look at the idea of the level of involvement versus the level of perceived product differentiation. So when you have high involvement and high product differentiation, basically you can use a traditional model such as get people to think about the product, develop strategies to get them to feel better about the product, and then the conative side is to behave in the way that you want. And when there's low product differentiation, then with a high level of involvement, this is when you need to change people's behavior initially. So you might offer a very low price, a discounted price, a sales promotion in order to get them to buy first, and then develop feelings and towards the product later, and then to think that afterwards that they've made a good buy. When there's low involvement, the same thing. There's a slightly different approach actually. When you have low involvement and when the level of product differentiation is not that relevant. So here we get people to think about the product, to buy it, and then feel positively towards it later on. So the marketing communications implications for low involvement products. So basically under this process, We expose potential customers, buyers to the message. We try to achieve a shift in their cognitive structure so that they buy. And one of the ways that we do this is through the brand experience process, and this leads to attitude formation. So usually advertisers of low involvement goods use repetition of product claims, and they copy elements that don't require significant levels of information processing. Simple benefits, umbrella concepts, catchy jingles, etc. And if you look at the Duracell battery ads, these are typical of low involvement products, so I don't have to think too much about it. So we know that not all response sequence and behaviours are explained adequately by any one of the response models. So we know that marketing communications is just one source of information, because consumers learn about products and they form attitudes and they make purchase decisions using a variety of methods. So from a marketing communications planning perspective, we need to make sure that marketers examine the communication situation for their product or service to ensure that they pick the right kind of response model. So here we have the foot cone and building planning model, and we can see again we have high involvement and low involvement. And so if we have a high involvement environment where basically we have a thinking kind of process, the kind of products which relate to this are cars, houses, new products. So basically we need to learn about it, then develop effective attitudes, and then purchase. So the possible implications, how do we test for high levels of involvement? We test for recall. We would use long copy format, provide reflective vehicles, and so we need lots of information in this particular process. When there's a low involvement kind of product where there's habit formation, we're talking about household items, every time you go to a supermarket, etc. Basically I buy, then I learn about it, and then I feel, which is the responsive side. So the test here is, how much did I sell? Perhaps small space ads, radios, point of sale, reminders. So if we're talking about high involvement and we want to develop an effective response towards particular products, such, for example, the Jador commercial that we saw earlier. And the kinds of products or services which relate to this are jewellery and cosmetics, fashion, apparel, motorcycles. And basically this is about developing an effective attitude, a positive feeling towards the product, learning and then do. So this is a psychological approach. On the other model, which is the informative thinker kind of, it's an economic approach. Some of the applications, some of the implications we're looking at are to test for attitude changes, emotional arousal, and here we're talking about large space advertisements, image specials, having executional impact. Then if we have low involvement products, such where there's the sense of feeling attached, such as self-satisfaction, we're talking about cigarettes, alcohol, confectionery. Here is basically we buy, then our attitudes, the marketeers try to develop positive feelings, and we call this a social approach. And we test for sales, and we're using the media, billboards, newspapers, point of sale, etc. And the idea is to create attention. So you can see, depending on the level of involvement and the kind of process, whether it's a thinking approach or a feeling approach, different products and services will apply different methods of marketing communication. We have a look at the cognitive response approach. So here basically we want to examine consumers' cognitive processing and advertising messages by looking at their cognitive responses to hearing, viewing or reading communications. So basically we ask what kinds of thoughts are evoked by an advertising message. And in order to identify this information, consumers write down or verbally report their reactions to a message. Now quite often this is done using focus groups. Sometimes it can be in-depth interviews. Depends on the product or service. A model for cognitive response. Basically, we're looking at exposure to the advertisement. We're analysing the product or message thoughts, the source-oriented thoughts, and also the ad execution thoughts. And when we analyse these product, source-oriented and ad execution thoughts, then we can come to better understand the kind of brand attitudes and also the attitudes towards the advertisement. And often we might, in focus groups, might use various storyboards with different kinds of scenarios to identify the impact of the message on the potential consumers. And this leads us to develop an understanding of what the purchase intention might be. So when we look at product message thoughts, so basically one of the objectives we have is to try and minimize counter arguments. So if we have competitive products, we want to try and identify the benefits and take into account or minimize any potential negatives from that product or service. And obviously another objective is to maximize the support arguments. In terms of source-oriented thoughts, the objective is don't use a spokesman that the audience doesn't like or trust. Otherwise we wind up with source degradation. And this comes down to the kind of brand ambassador that we select in the communication process. So the objective is use a spokesperson liked or trusted so that we can actually use the source to bolster our message. In terms of ad execution thoughts, this enters the realm of creativity, the quality of visual effects, the colours and voice tones. And so this might involve thoughts about the ad itself or the effect attitudes towards the ads. I mean, these are important because these various kind of effect attitudes can actually transfer to the brand. Now this ad execution area is a really tricky area because logically when you're if you're conducting market research, you'll find out various things. So you understand the needs, you understand what the requirements are, but actually transferring that into a creative mechanism is often one of the most difficult aspects of developing a really great marketing communications program. Another thing which becomes important in relation to how to persuade particular kinds of consumers is we call the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion. And basically, this is about the way consumers process and respond to particular messages. One of the seminal papers was developed by Petty and Gacchioppo back in 1986, and they discussed what they called central and peripheral routes to attitude change. And there's a model up here which talks about how do I develop persuasive communication. And the first thing I ask is to what extent is the person motivated to that particular process. Then I start to look at to what extent do they have an ability to process information. And Then if they have an ability to process, then we look at the nature of the cognitive processing side. So whether they have favourable thoughts, unfavourable, or whether they're neutral. And I think the end result is, to what extent can I develop an enduring positive attitude change? Now remember, attitude change can be either positive or negative. Some of the things that we need to explore in the elaboration likelihood model, or the ELM model. So we can see that two of the major requirements of this model is that we need to look at the level of motivation to process a message, and that depends on a range of factors such as involvement, personal relevance, and individual needs and arousal levels. And then there's the ability of that individual to actually process that knowledge, whether it's their level of knowledge, their intellectual capacity, to what extent do they have an opportunity to process the message. So it could be, even though you create a humorous message, we need to, I suppose an example here is you might have an attractive model and that person could be distracted from processing that particular information. So some people believe that also opportunity should be included as a third element. So here, when we look at the ELMN model, it focuses on the way consumers respond to persuasive messages. And we have these two routes to attitude change, the central route or the peripheral route. So the central route basically says, if I have the ability and motivation to process a message, if that ability and motivation is high, and close attention is paid to the message content, consumers will read through and try to understand the detailed message arguments. And the peripheral route, on the other hand, is when I don't really care much. There's a low involvement situation. So basically, consumers are not going to look at the detailed arguments, that they will be, they'll rely on peripheral cues. So for example, we have here this Jenny Craig television commercial with the Jason Hodges in the middle. So the ad contains peripheral cues, most notably a celebrity endorser, Jason Hodges from Better Homes and Gardens. So if it's a low involvement product, we tend to be influenced by the brand ambassador, by the celebrity, by the person, much more than what is being said. It's who is saying it. So how communication works, we're talking about advertising input. There's a message, a media scheduling, there's repetition. Individuals' level of involvement will affect their motivation and their ability, and then consumers will think about a particular ad or a message. They will be affected or not affected by it, and that will can also be affected by the level of experience, and then consumers will choose a product. They'll consume it, they'll be loyal, or they'll develop habit for various habits, and that will feed back into their experience, which will continue in terms of the purchasing cycle. So as far as the communication process, that's the end of this segment, and the next segment we'll move on to branding.